Braves legend Andruw Jones is officially a Hall of Famer, meaning the 1990s Braves had 8 Hall of Famers and won 1 World Series. Yes, welcome on in to Braves Today, your daily source for news, notes, and updates on your Atlanta Braves. I'm your host, Lindsay Crosby, award-winning baseball writer and podcaster. You can follow me on social media at Crosby Baseball, and you can find all my written work, bravestoday.com. That's the Braves Today Substack and the Braves Today newsletter, which is also daily. We're proudly part of the Believe Podcast Network, presented to you by FanDuel. Download the FanDuel app or go to FanDuel.com to get started. I want to talk about those 1990s Braves, how dominant they were, how many Hall of Famers they had, and the fact that they won 1 World Series. But before we do that, let's take a minute to celebrate Andruw Jones. I was lucky enough to be invited to the Hall of Fame's media availability, right? Virtual media availability last night after Andruw was selected, and got to spend about 20 minutes listening to the questions asked of Andruw and some of his recollections and his stories. And the biggest thing that stood out to me is this was not guaranteed. We've talked on the show before about the character clause and how it's his 9th ballot. He got 78.4%. The threshold is 75%. He got in on his 9th year on the ballot. He had 1 more year and he would have fallen off. So wasn't guaranteed at all. And how he didn't start playing baseball with the goal of being a Hall of Famer. And he didn't really think about it while he was playing. But this is where he ended up, and he's grateful. The quote here, quote, "You don't play this game to be a Hall of Famer. You play to help your team win a championship. And when you go out there and be consistent and put up numbers, and then your name starts popping up when he's talking about as a candidate, it's a big honor for me, and it's a big honor for my family." And he specifically mentioned his dad. I feel like you see this a lot with guys in the Hall of Fame, but his dad passed away in 2016. And it's the story that so many of us have heard. Like, his dad worked a full-time job. After work, he would come home. The quote from Andruw, he was working, and after work, he would go out, get on the field, and work out with me and get me ready to compete and be ready for a long career. So I started thinking about that, started tearing up a little by myself in my room. He was not in Atlanta like he usually is for this announcement. He was actually in the Dominican at a golf tournament hosted by Albert Pujols. And so they were watching MLB Network, and there were a bunch of Hall of Famers in the room. Ken Griffey Jr., CC Sabathia, Adrian Beltre, and all this stuff. And you saw the guys all swarm him as soon as he was announced as a Hall of Famer. It was really a cool moment to kind of watch. One of the things I enjoy the most for any Hall of Fame, not just baseball, but football, anything, is when the guys find out they're Hall of Famers. I really love it. It's different with football because they orchestrate the Pro Football Hall of Fame. They orchestrate the whole reveal thing and they tape it and all of that. Whereas sometimes for baseball, you're other places, you're spread out. There's a TV show to announce it. But I do really just enjoy seeing guys get this. And there were a couple notable, milestones or notable things about this selection. The first one is Andrew's very first year on the ballot, 2018. He only got 31 votes. Was 7.3% of the vote. And according to the voting rules, if you don't receive 5% of the vote, you fall off the ballot and you're no longer on subsequent ballots. There's a bunch of guys who were one and dones yesterday. Nick Markakis got 1 vote. A bunch of guys yesterday who that's it. That was their one chance on the ballot and they're done now. He went from 7.3% in that first ballot to 78.4% in the 9th ballot. It's the lowest debut vote percentage to end up in the Hall of Fame since the BBWAA went to annual voting in 1966. He went from 31 votes in 2018 to 333 yesterday. And when you kind of look at how this happened, right? Like where all the votes came from, some of this year that got him over the threshold were new voters. There were over 50 new voters added this year, which is more than usual. But the BBWAA didn't let MLB.com and other internet writers join until 2016. And so this was 10 years that they had been paying dues, and they were finally allowed to vote. So all the MLB.com folks, Mark Bowman, and everybody, on the website, may have been covering baseball for 30 years. They weren't able to vote until this year. Of the 38 known ballots from first-time voters, because remember, it's private unless either you release it or you approve the hall to release it 9 days from today. It's 10 days from the announcement, so 9 days from today. Of the 38 known ballots from first-time voters, 92.1% of them went to Andruw Jones. So the new generation of voters, some of them watched him and covered him, right? Mark Bowman, Andruw mentioned, talking to Mark Bowman in the press conference yesterday, you saw me out there because Mark covered the team when Andruw was playing. But so many of those new voters went for Andruw because of the defensive metrics and being able to quantify just how good Andruw Jones was. So I love that. He thanked the voters, right? He thanked his teammates. He thanked all the guys who were already in the hall from those teams. And again, we're going to get to that in a few minutes. And just, how he was very happy to be their teammates. And he's excited that he gets a chance to be at the same point, have the same legacy with them. The second really interesting thing is him and Carlos Beltran, longtime center fielder for, I think it was the Royals and the Mets and all that. He was also elected yesterday. So it was two center fielders. It's been really hard to get center fielders in the hall, and then two of them in the same year. This is the first time in annual voting history. The fourth time in annual voting history that two non-pitchers at the same position went in on the same ballot. The last time it happened was 2004. The time it happened before that was Hank Aaron. That gives you an idea of how long it's been. And fun fact, Carlos Beltran and Andruw Jones were born one day apart in 1977. Different places, obviously. Beltran's from Puerto Rico and Jones is from Curacao. But they FaceTimed each other yesterday and were congratulating each other. And Andruw said it was really cool. He competed against him for so many years, and getting to going to the hall at the same time as him is really cool. But the biggest thing that stood out to me that I just thought was interesting, he gave the shout outs to Atlanta like we would expect and everything, and talked about what the city did for him and the fans and everything. But what I thought was really cool was when Andruw talked about being the first player from Curacao to make the Hall of Fame. And he talked about, the island's just baseball crazy, and kind of recognizing the people that came before him and the fact there were going to be some after him. So I have the quote here. We grew up playing baseball so young, That's all we knew. When we grew up, we wanted to play baseball. I would say thank you to Hensley Mullins. And Hensley Mullins is the first player from Curacao to appear in an MLB game, for giving us an opportunity, for being the first guy that opened the door for us and the guys that came after him. Curacao had so many guys that had signed professionally that never made it. When I got the opportunity to sign, I used to work out with them, and they told me so much about what I need to look forward to. It's really a community in Curacao. But Andruw also pointed out he's not going to be the last player from Curacao. For the first player to make it from Curacao, it's a great honor, and I know we're going to have more people coming. I know Kenley Jansen is going to be the next one, and I can't wait to see him. And the Kenley Jansen note, he is close to 500 career saves. He's at 476. He got a 29 with the Angels last year. It's his third consecutive season of 25 or more saves. It's his fifth consecutive season of 25 or more saves. He signed with Detroit for his age 38 season. But what I really love about this, and I don't quite think Braves fans realize this or talk about this enough, I've pointed this out a little bit in the past, I think when we signed Profar. Andruw is the real reason that Curacao is a Atlanta Braves crazy island. Of the top 7 players from the island of Curacao by Baseball Reference WAR that have played in MLB, 6 of them have been Atlanta Braves. Obviously, Andruw Jones, Kenley Jansen played here in 2022, but Andrelton Simmons, 2012 through 2015, Simba was great, loved Simba. Jair Jurgens, starting pitcher, 2008 through 2012. Jurickson Profar, signed for 2025. Ozzie Albies, clearly 2017 through 2025. Jonathan Scope is the only other player on that top 7 leaderboard who did not play for the Braves. He was last active in MLB in 2023, so that ship has probably sailed. Outside of Profar and Scope, the only other active players from Curacao in the major leagues that I could find is Ceddanne Rafaela of the Boston Red Sox. And his middle name, or one of his middle names, is Chipper, after Chipper Jones, because when he was a kid, they watched a ton of Braves baseball, and his mom just thought Chipper was the cutest. I really think that's just, he's the first from the island, but he also blazed the trail for Atlanta to have so many of these guys come through. So many of these guys kind of roll in and come through the city, come through the organization, and leave the impact that they did. I don't think there's any of these guys that have pitched or that have come to Atlanta from Curacao that we would say the team would be better off if they didn't have that guy. Every single one of them has been a very good player. Andrelton Simmons is genuinely the best defensive outfielder I have ever seen. Jones was the best defensive center fielder I've ever seen. Ozzie's been, the heart and soul and the emotional heart of the team now he's the longest tenured Brave right now. I mean, he's been around for close to a decade now. And this whole thing about Andruw Jones joining all of his former teammates in the Hall of Fame got me thinking about the 1990s Braves. And was it a missed opportunity? Right? We'll talk about that next, right here on Braves Today. But first, today's episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. We talk about winning the World Series. Atlanta is in the odds here. They're 6th best odds, 3rd best in the National League to win the World Series, plus 1,500 in the National League ahead of them. Phillies at plus 1,300. Dodgers clearly plus 220. In the American League, Yankees, Mariners, Blue Jays, really feels like Yankees probably shouldn't be the number one. That's a lot, banking a lot on Andruw Jones, banking a lot on Aaron Judge, and then banking a lot on a Max Fried and Carlos Rodon led rotation. I think Max Fried's great. Just banking a lot on the stars to star because the depth is kind of iffy. Like, they're still talking about needing a second or third baseman. They still don't know who's going to happen in left field. Just feels it's kind of like an odd to have them as the second best odds to win the World Series, but it is what it is. If you think Atlanta's undervalued, the Yankees are overvalued, any of that, and you want to place these odds, FanDuel.com or download the FanDuel app today. Talking about winning the World Series, the 1990s Atlanta Braves, at this point, are one of the greatest accumulations of talent in modern baseball history. We're not talking about those legendary 1920s Yankees before free agency and before, black people were allowed to play and all that stuff in the majors. They had to be in the Negro Leagues. We're talking about like in modern baseball. Because what I don't think people realize, the 1990s Braves had 8 different Hall of Famers. They weren't all players, but Jones, obviously. The starting pitcher trio, Tom Glavine, John Smoltz, Greg Maddux. Glavine and Smoltz got in 2014. Smoltz got in 2015 because he played one additional season. They were all first ballot guys. Chipper Jones was put in 2018. Fred McGriff went in 2023, the first baseman. Bobby Cox, as the manager, went in 2014, and general manager and team president John Schuerholz went in 2017. So 6 Hall of Famers on the team, 8 Hall of Famers in the organization in that time. And the Braves won a single World Series in 1995. I keep going back and forth about whether or not I think that it's disappointing, right? And let's just talk this out, right? Let's talk about why. And I want to hear from you too, by the way. If you're listening on, like if you're watching on YouTube, you can leave a comment underneath the video. If you're listening on audio, I'm on social media at Crosby Baseball. But like, I want to know what you think. Were the 90s Braves a disappointment because they only won a single World Series despite all the consecutive division titles? They won it 14 straight years. They made the postseason, obviously, all of those years. There was no postseason in 94. They made 5 World Series, and they only won 1. And thinking this out, my first reaction is to say they made 5 World Series, and they only won a single one, means you can't, I guess in good faith, say that they are, or say that they lived up to expectations or that it was a success, right? You had 5 shots and you took down 1. Again, that's just my gut reaction. It's disappointing to only have won 1 because you went to 5 of them. And then you start looking at, and the other argument that goes with that is the way that you got to the postseason. 1991, you go worst to first. You literally go from 65 and 97 in 1990 to 94 and 68. So you go worst to first, you make it to the World Series, and then you lose the 1991 World Series in 7 games, right? The Twins take you down in game 7, 1-0 in 10 innings. And you lose the World Series. You know, was it Gene Larkin hits an RBI single off of Alejandro Pena in the 10th of Game 7, and you lose the World Series. It's like, okay, the next year, you storm back, you win the division, you make it to the World Series again, and you lose in 6 to Toronto. Like, you weren't getting blown out. This entire stretch, the only time you got swept in the World Series was 1999. The Yankees beat you in 4 straight games. Right? Greg Maddux took a loss. John Smoltz took a loss. They won a game in, I almost said overtime. They won a game in extras. I think game 3, they won it in the 10th inning. But just a situation where your studs got beat, right? Smoltz went 7 innings with 3 runs, struck out 11, and he took a loss. Maddux went 7 innings with 2 earned runs, and he took a loss. Like, your studs just got beat. Your offense just wasn't able to perform against Roger Clemens and David Cone, Orlando Hernandez. They beat up Andy Pettit. They mashed Andy Pettit. But like the rest of it, outside of that, you just really couldn't perform against a really good Yankees team. Even 96, you lost 4 games to 2. Like, you didn't get, you only once got swept. All of the rest of the time, they were competitive series. They ran, like, you ran them out. You had, 4 other NLCS defeats, and I don't think any of those were sweeps either. Like, you were competitive, and we talk so much about how the postseason's a different animal, right? How much harder the postseason is than the regular season, even back then. Especially in an era where offense was, I'm not going to say easy, but because of the types of players that were developing to be good in the steroid era, right? Guys who could hit for power and all of that. It felt like offense came a bit easier, and Atlanta made it work with a pitching and defense plan that you don't necessarily see work a ton anymore in the postseason. They made 5, they won 1. So again, it feels like it's a disappointment. Especially when you think about the fact that, like, you had 3 Hall of Fame starters. You had 6 Hall of Fame players in that stretch, and you won 1 of them. You had so many chances and so many opportunities. Part of me wonders, and I apologize if I touched on this a little bit earlier in this segment and didn't quite flesh it out completely. Part of me wonders, would we look at it differently if Atlanta hadn't been so dominant in the regular season, right? I remember watching the 1990s Braves documentary, and David Justice kind of touched on this. And he wasn't being negative, but he kind of touched on it almost felt like winning the division was kind of taken for granted. Like everybody just kind of assumed they were going to win the division. And so the energy wasn't really there, right? It was like the complacency of winning. The expectations were clearly win the World Series, right? If you go to 1995, go to 96. That was their 4th World Series in 6 years. Like, the expectations were nothing short of winning the World Series. And Smoltz has talked about if they had been able to win that 96 World Series, had been back-to-back champs, and had been to 4 World Series in 6 years and won 2 of them back-to-back like that they would have probably been considered the dynasty of the 90s. Not what the Yankees ended up taking that mantle as like the generationally great team of the 90s and early 2000s. But like, it's hard to argue that the Braves wouldn't have been that at that point. And Smoltz has kind of talked about everything felt a little different after 96. They only made 1 World Series after that. They made it in 1999, and that's when they got swept. The rest of them, they had 2 consecutive NLCS defeats. Then they got swept in the NLDS in 2000. Then they lost in the CS. Then they had 4 straight NLDS defeats, right? Like they never hit the heights of 96 ever again. And I can't help but think about that. I think I kind of agree with Smoltz, like that being the turning point. At the same time, had they won 2 World Series, let's say they went to 5 and they won 2, would we still be having the conversation about, well, they should have won 3? They should have at least beaten 500 in the World Series. And so I think at the end of the day, it's hard to say they won a World Series, they won a championship, and were disappointed. But I also think it's entirely valid to say they had 5 opportunities to win the World Series with as dominant as they were, and they only won 1. Because what's wild to think about, this current championship window that the Braves are in, and that dynastic dominant run, both of those have won a single World Series. And we've seen this iteration of the Braves in a time where there's more parity in the league. It doesn't feel like it because the Dodgers have won the last 2, but there is more parity in the league right now than there was in the mid-90s. The way that this Atlanta team, they won it in 21, like they were almost left for dead. AA decided to go for it. They had the best record from the trade deadline to the end of the season. Everybody talks about like that was the worst team to win a World Series in so long because of their overall record, right? They were 88-73, but from the trade deadline to the end of the season, they had the best record in baseball. They were the best team in baseball entering the postseason. But the way that things have happened for this team, 2 consecutive 100-win seasons, including with a generational offense in 2023 to get knocked out in the first round, and then to deal with all the injuries they dealt with and back into the postseason on the final day in 2024, and then not get out of the wild card, not win a game in the postseason against San Diego. Part of me wonders if the 90s Braves had some of that adversity stuff, right? If they backed into the postseason in the final day one year, if they made it as a wild card another year, if they hadn't been so dominant in the regular season, would we look at the 1 World Series as a disappointment? Because I think right now, if this 2000s Braves, this 2020 Braves, this decade's Atlanta Braves team ends up only winning 1 World Series, I think we're going to say we're disappointed. That you had Ronald Acuna Jr., you had Chris Sale, you had all these guys, and you only won one. And so because of that, if that's going to be how we approach the 2020 decade Atlanta Braves, in a time where there's a juggernaut in the Dodgers and there's all this parity in the league, then I think we have to go back and look at the 1990s Braves and say it's so hard to win, it's so fluky, but you made it to 5 World Series and you only won 1. And some of the ways you lost some of these were just very frustrating. Game 6 of 1992 in extras. Charlie Liebrandt in the 11th inning gives up a 2 RBI double. You get one of those runs back thanks to Brian Hunter, but then Otis Nixon grounds out, like he bunt out for the final out of the World Series, and you lose. And just all of that happened because it's just frustrating how some of these things went down, right? 1996. You look at Game 6. And the Yankees score 3 runs in the game, all of them off of Greg Maddux. Like, Greg Maddux is the guy they tag for this. And it was all in 1 inning. In the 3rd inning, he gives up a double to Paul O'Neill. Mariano Duncan grounds out to move him to 3rd. Joe Girardi hits a triple. Derek Jeter singles to bring in Girardi. And then later in the inning, Bernie Williams singles to score Jeter from second base after Jeter steals second base. Like, it's just, I mean, none of those, the triple was well hit, but like none of those were home runs. He wasn't getting shelled. They just put up 3 runs in 1 inning on Greg Maddux, and that was enough. End of the day, I'm repeating myself now, and I apologize for that. End of the day, I think it's hard to say this is anything but a disappointment for the Braves to only have won 1 World Series in the 1990s. When you look at, they had 3 Hall of Fame starting pitchers, they had 3 Hall of Fame position players, as well as a manager and a GM. And I think if you want to argue that just getting there is so hard and just winning it so hard that the fact they won 1 is good enough, that's perfectly fine. I think you're entitled to that opinion, and I'm not going to say that you're wrong, but I think my opinion is just 5 bites at the apple to come away with 1 championship feels like an underperformance. Because right now, this current core for Atlanta has 1 World Series in 1 appearance. Imagine if this roster had 4 more shots to win a World Series, like got in the World Series 4 more times. We'd assume they would win at least one of those, right? This has been Braves Today for Wednesday, January 21st. Do me a favor. You're listening to an audio 5-star review would be fantastic. Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification bell so that you know when we drop the next episode. And until next time, this has been Braves Today.